And we'll get our meeting, our Public Works and Planning Committee meeting, January 11th, 2024 started. Looks like we have some new folks in the chambers this morning. We'll go around doing introductions, if you don't mind, starting with Mr. Spicer.
Councilman Derek Spicer, Ward 4.
Councilman Mark Schwartz, Ward 5.
Councilman Scott Spencer, Ward 3.
Jack Deacon, Ward 1.
Mike Lester, Ward 2.
Matt Marash, Public Works Director for the city.
Jerry Stegman, Transit Manager.
David Bangy, City Engineer.
Brett Smith, Operations Division Director.
A.G. Hoslog, Public Works Admin Assistant.
Clint Smith, Plan and Protection Services Director.
Dave Helmick, City Staff.
I'm Norman, City Attorney.
Welcome everyone this morning. Item 2, approval of December 14, 2023 committee meeting minutes.
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Item 3, citizens' opportunity to address council committee on stormwater and other public works issues. Anyone wish to speak this morning? You, sir. Just come to the podium and state your name, address, if you wish.
My name is Patrick Casey. I live at 1825 Rolling Hills Drive. And I was here last time about the situation on Rolling Hills Drive. You've recently put up a temporary speed indicator for the people driving. I've seen a slight increase in people being considerate. However, you mentioned sidewalks, and sidewalks would fix one problem, but it wouldn't stop people from breaking the law. And that's one of my concerns because there are habitual speeders. And I can name people. I mean, I can tell you what cars are doing it, literally. And there's at least 20 that do it every day. So my concern is that. And I think speed bump would be a great way to slow them down. And I think that's what's needed. I know some of my neighbors are here as well, and they agree that something needs to be done. And I realize that it's a cost to the city. However, people's lives are at stake. All our houses are close to the street. And I think that it's just an accident waiting to happen, to be honest. People go down the street at 45 miles an hour in a residential zone. If they miss or hit a curb, they could be in my house or anyone else's house. So I think something needs to be done. That's all I really have to say. So.
Well, we will be giving an update on some information regarding
Okay.
being one of them. So you're welcome to stick around.
Thank you.
We'll get that point. Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak this morning? Okay. Thank you very much. We will go to item 4, new business. There's a slight alteration to the agenda. We're going to have Mr. Landwehr and CMPS give a information on our Wildwood extension.
So thanks for allowing a little bit of change to the agenda. We appreciate this. We had talked previously, and I forgot to really communicate that we ought to get it on this agenda.
You did mention it to me, and I forgot to read that.
It's all good. I'd like to introduce Cody Darr with Central Missouri Professional Services. He's engineer, designer, everything on the project. David and I have been working with Cody since we re-engaged them on the project, going back, this past summer probably. And it's tracking along very well. Generally, about every month or so, we've been over there discussing various parts of the project, different things that have changed since the first go around at this. So I'll turn it over to Cody to go through kind of where things are, and then we'll just answer questions at the end. So.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Cody Darr, kind of the manager at CMPS for this project. Taking it over, it was originally started in 2007. Paul over here helped originally design this, so I'm just kind of once it restarted, I'm kind of taking it over. So I'm not going to get too much in the weeds here, just trying to go over this. This is an overview. You can see it starts at the north end at Edgewood and goes about 3/4 of a mile south to Rock Ridge Road, where we're going to be installing a roundabout, that 3-leg roundabout for right now, future stub to the east. So originally, this was envisioned as a 38-foot curb and gutter section. You can see at the bottom. We, in this current iteration, with the county and the city, we decided to go with the 32-foot, 2 12-foot travel lanes and 4-foot shoulder on each side. We figured this is probably more appropriate at this point in time. Maybe in the future it might need to be widened, but this is what we're going with now, 32-foot asphalt section. There will still be a 38-foot curb and gutter section at Edgewood where you're gonna have a left turn lane, but that's only for a short section there. This is one of the bigger changes from the original project. We are crossing Wares Creek just south of Edgewood, and originally we had an arch span structure. And since 2007, and then again it was kind of restarted in 2009 and maybe a little bit in 2011. But in 2012, FEMA came through here, studied Wares Creek, and with that study determined base flood elevation and a floodway, which means that when we cross this creek, we will need to establish a no rise. We won't be able to impact that elevation at all. So originally when it's unstudied, you just have to prove that you're not raising it a foot. Well, there's a big difference in being able to raise it a little bit to get the water into the structure versus not having to raise it at all. So we actually engaged Bartlett and West to do some hydraulic studies to ensure that our structure would not create a rise. That resulted in an increase in size from a 32-foot span to, you can see here, a 51-foot span is what we're now proposing over the Wares Creek, maintaining, I don't know if you can kind of, oops. You see we're not disturbing the channel right there. That's kind of to help us with the regulatory process with the Corps of Engineers. As you guys probably are aware, every time the Corps updates their permits, the nationwide permits for this one in particular, linear transportation, it gets more restrictive. So now any disturbance or fill in a channel over 0.03 acres is required to have mitigation. So you have to purchase mitigation or some kind of improvement to a channel to offset the impacts to the channel that you're creating. So in order to avoid that, that's one of the things Bartlett and West was doing too, is ensuring that we can meet those regulatory without having to purchase mitigation as part of this project. So since there's a little tributary to Wares Creek that flows from south to north to Wares Creek, and you can kind of see it kind of is just east of this green line, which is the Greenway Trail actually. But in order to get that road a little bit higher, we're having to fill a little bit there. So we're gonna need some material, which we were originally planning on doing on the Chamber property up there. Since John Farr has bought the 40 acres, this whole 40 acres here, and he's also bought this 12 acres, and then there's another 13 acres over here, something about 25 acres he bought up here. So he controls all that, and he is looking to do some sort of townhome type development on that project. So we're kind of working in coordination with him to borrow material, because that's a huge hill right there. He will need to cut into that hill for his roads. So he will have material to export. So we are taking that from him. And you can see in the colored area there, that's all cut. Each color kind of represents a depth of cut. I just kind of highlighted that to show the area that we're taking material. We need probably approximately 50,000 cubic yards. They have plenty. So you can see that colored area is actually about 80,000 cubic yards. the Greenway Trail. So as part of this project, we also are going to try to, and David with the city might know a little bit more about this, or he's the one who kind of envisioned this to go along with this project, where that green line, it's not real clear here, but just on the east side of the road, kind of circuitous along with the creek, kind of make it a little more aesthetic for people walking or biking down there. It's 10-foot trail, 2,300 linear feet, going to the south edge of the Farrow property for right now. The south from there is a little bit, the alignment's a little bit undetermined. That's across it. So we kind of looked at different options, maybe going under the road or, staying on the east side of the road. But right now have designed a at-grade crossing with pedestrian signals, just south of South Far. That's the South Far entrance right there to his development, and there would be a pedestrian crossing right there. So we included that in our design. Another part of this project, pretty big part, is the roundabout at Rock Ridge Road, improving that intersection for future capacity. Originally, down here is how we had designed that roundabout. It's not real clear just trying to stick it on there. But this is the new layout that, with the help of the city and David Banger, we have come up with this new layout and geometry that is going to help us meet the new standards for vehicle speeds, and also to try to help with larger truck movements through this roundabout. If you look close, we have shifted the roundabout a little bit to make the legs work a little better, and it doesn't quite fit in the original right-of-way that we obtained in 2009 or 2011. We have talked with Ed Rackers, who owns this property here, and he has agreed verbally to swap some we'll give some of that right-of-way back and get a little bit more just to cover that road that we're kind of outside of the current right-of-way. The schedule right now that we're on, as Eric mentioned, we have been, since I think our kickoff meeting was in mid-July last year, and we have been progressing along. This is from today, the meeting, just some milestones that I kind of put on here, a tentative design up to the bid in late April, and hopefully having the contractor proceed at July 1st. Kind of what we're hoping, get the roundabout done. Right now, we kind of envision, and this isn't for sure, but right now we kind of envision the roundabout portion will be done first by the end of this year, and then the rest of the project done by mid-spring or mid-2025. Those are just some pictures for reference, but that's pretty much all I have for as far as an update of where we are at on the project for right now. So if you have any particular questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Any questions from the committee this morning? We appreciate the update, and we're excited about the project moving along, and it's been something that's been on the drawing board quite some time. So
yeah,
we're excited about it. And we're appreciating Mr. Ferrer of his commitment to start development in that area. So
I appreciate it.
thank you all.
Thanks.
Have a good rest of your day. All right. Item A, waiver of abatement tax liens on 915 Jefferson Street.
Thank you. So 915 Jefferson Street is a property that the history, and particularly Dave's group with code enforcement, has some history with, and result of that history, excuse me, is about over $6,000 in city tax liens currently exist on the property, some various nuisance abatement projects. In the last year or so, that property was purchased by an individual, and then that individual has just recently, this week actually, deeded that property over to the Salvation Army, which owns property next to 915 Jefferson. And so Salvation Army has approached the city and asked that the city waive its special tax bills from the nuisance work, and so that they can restore the property, bring it back to some useful life. City has done this in the past for other types of nonprofits. So we have kind of we have a path, we have a form that we use for this type of action. But we need council's or committee's input before we take it off the council. These types of tax liens are only waivable by the city council. I believe we have a representative from Salvation Army here who might be able to answer some further questions about the project, but we're just looking for either a recommendation or other action on the waiver of its $6,123 in special tax bill for nuisance abatement work in the past 3 years. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or invite the major up to say anything as well.
I do have some question. So the gentleman that has just recently deeded the property to Salvation Army, was his original intent to restore the property and then?
His original intent was to donate it to the Salvation Army.
That was his original
Yes.
intent?
Yeah. I've been in contact with the individual's attorney for about the past year or so, trying to work on this and acquire the property through some creative means.
Any questions?
Just, wanted to ask about the plans for renovation and the use of the property.
Right now, we're in the middle of a feasibility study for our capital campaign, and one of the things that it's going to tell us is what would the city and the community like us to use with things like this property. We have some of our own ideas, but we want to hear from the community about how they would like us to see use things like that property as we do our full capital campaign and remodel of our shelter.
What would your organization's recommendations or?
So right now, one of the things we're looking at doing is possibly turning it into a storage or garage facility. This gives us more storage for what is already in our basement, which is what we're hoping to turn into our social services department as a part of our full capital campaign and remodel. And then one of the things that does is it gives us a covered garage, which puts us at the likelihood of being able to host a mobile kitchen for disasters here locally in Jefferson City. That's one of the things I'm really fighting for. Right now, the closest one is in Columbia. And when I've served fires here locally, we've had trouble getting it from Columbia to here. And mobile kitchens like this was used greatly during the tornado and things, and allows us to go out to mobile locations that are not normally reachable for people to come to a site to receive food and supplies while we're out serving the disaster. And sorry, not to jump in, but Mr. Helmick just told me, so the specific abatement work is that this building was a dangerous building. Essentially, the back half of the building has fallen off, and so we had to abate that and secure it. That is the nature of the work, and so people have been squatting in it. People have been squatting in it, and so just to kind of give context, rehabilitation is certainly not impossible. It's not something that we see here at the city as being very likely. So this is a dangerous building type situation. And we're looking at applying for a CBDG grant to be able to do the asbestos abatement and to have a grant to help tear it down as well.
And during that time, your acquisition of it to the time of tear down, you can just kind of give us some assurance that you all, as your agency, will make the necessary securing methods of the property.
It already has a door on it now, which it didn't have before. The property has already been cleaned up between us and the donor, and a bunch of trees have been taken down. There's a few things that had been left that we're looking at getting as well, but we've taken care of it as much as we can. It was a couple $100,000 to be able to bring it up to be livable in, so that's why we looked at not doing that.
Any other questions? This is an action item that is being requested for us to make a recommendation on, so I would entertain a motion to do so.
I'll move.
Okay. Councilman Schwartz, Councilman Spicer, Do a roll call vote on that, please.
Deacon.
Aye.
Lester.
Aye.
Spicer.
Aye.
Schwartz. Spencer.
Aye. So that'll be brought to full councils.
Yeah, it'll bring the full council, probably likely hopefully the 1st of February.
Good luck to you and your organization.
All righty, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you. All right, item B, tri-level planning study resolution. Mr. Bangy.
Yes, the last Campo board meeting, which was held in December, the Jefferson City Regional Economic Partnership approached the board and requested that they look or begin looking at a study at the tri-level. And so they also suggested that CPG funds, land grant funds, which are federal funds that Campo uses for planning activities, to be used for that project in the amount of $200,000. That $200,000 requires a 20% match, which would be $50,000. And so that match was discussed to be split between the county and the city. I believe the county had taken action on that at their last meeting and approved $25,000 to be used for this. And so what we have before you is a resolution that will go to the council approving that $25,000 to be part of the local match for the CPG funds for the study of the tri-level. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
This is another action item that we'd like to do to show our support to start this process. So, entertain a motion to proceed with that process.
So moved.
Second.
Have a roll call vote on this issue, please.
Deacon.
Aye.
Lester.
Aye.
Spicer.
Aye.
Schwartz. Spencer.
Aye. And that will be brought to the council.
It is actually on the agenda for this coming council meeting.
We have some representatives here. Do any of you want to speak on that timeline as well?
Yeah, just since this is the first time we've really been to this body regarding this issue, I just, studying the tri-level and the expressway, that's a project that the community has talked about for years. And with the recent increase in federal funding, particularly on infrastructure, we thought it was a good time to start to visit that project. There's always been talk that the tri-level needs to be improved, but there's never really been any work to figure out what exactly those improvements should be. So going through this process and the study will really define what the expressway and tri-level need to look like to serve the transportation need. And once we have the needed improvements plan in place, then we can start looking for other additional funds to actually finish the planning process and move on to construction. So
That design has been in service, and it's not all in service. There's been sections of it been removed for a number of years, but that's from the early
60s, yeah. So we appreciate your support in that, and transportation is really the driver of economic development. So we really feel it's an important project for the community, and something that's been talked about for years, and we feel like it's a good time to try to move it forward.
Well, we appreciate our partnership with JC Rep and driving this issue forward, bringing it to our attention.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment too from the Campo perspective. So it is kind of a joint group. We have county and the city and Campo. Campo's kind of the body where a lot of that conversation initiated. So they'll be meeting actually their technical committee later this morning. If they move that project along to the full board, they could go ahead and approve the amendment to their budget, which is necessary to appropriate that $200,000. And then they would perhaps hold a special meeting to get that moving. So we've put together, staff did actually kind of a timeline that we're working on right now, and this is part of that timeline. So we're trying to keep to that as much as possible. It's pretty aggressive, but we think so far so good, and we're going to kind of keep moving that along. We'd anticipate actually being back in front of council in March sometime to make that amendment to the consolidated planning grant at that point. Happy to answer any questions about that.
Any questions? We appreciate that timeline, yes, it is aggressive, but we love aggressive timing, so we can handle it. Thank you. All right, item C, MSP updates. You're on deck.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the last meeting, I think there had been some mention about getting an update on some of the activities at the MSP site. So I'm going to turn over here in a second to Dave Helmick, who'll give an update on a couple of the kind of pending activities we have right now. But just a quick recap, over the last several months, staff's kind of started to kind of look at the MSP project, and we've pivoted a little bit from some of the previous projects. And so we've identified a kind of a host of activities that we're looking to initiate at the MSP site. These two are kind of the top of the list, things we're moving on right now. But they fall within kind of our draft budget that we actually had taken to the Finance Committee several months ago. So that budget for the whole site is looking about a $6.2 million project. And that includes $2.1 million from a community revitalization grant, a little over $1 million from the city, and then also county and state funds. So it's a big project. I think everybody's eager to see some activity there. So we're kind of happy to present, I think, some of these things that are going to be moving hopefully within the next several months. So Dave, you want to kind of give some of the details there?
So we've got a couple projects going on at the MSP site. The first one is currently we have out to bid brush and debris removal at the city-owned portion of the MSP site. We broke the bid down in two different areas, with them being labeled up here as 1 and then as 2. One is about 18.8685 acres. That would include removal of all new growth vegetation, brush, down trees, trash, storm debris, basically anything except for intact fixtures, the wall, things like that. So this would be a clean site. It'd be developable, it'd be presentable, and it'd be safe. Section 2 is more of a thicker grove of trees that have been there for a while. That section would be going through and removing all the brush and undergrowth. Any trees over 12 inches in diameter would stay. And then also part of the bid is we can go through and select additional trees if we'd like ahead of time to mark those to stay as part of the project. So we have gone through, we are at the stage of, we had a pre-bid this last week. At the pre-bid, there was 9 companies that showed up, pretty good interest in it. We walked the site, site 1 and then site 2. The pre-bid is done and bids will be open next week on the 18th. Once those bids are opened, then the next step would be to award a contract and take that contract to council for approval. The types of items that we're talking about removing, there's piles of debris from the storm that are still left on site. There's areas of new growth all throughout the city-controlled portion, in areas like this here. As of 2006, 2007, this was all clean cut. It was all green space if you look back at the old aerials. So we're not removing any old growth trees or anything like that. This is all new growth. This is brush. This is nuisance plants and then storm debris. That's the first project that I'm working on currently.
Good.
Yes.
Piggyback off that is the Lafayette.
Correct. So on section 2, you can see that's the lower section that goes from, there's a fence along here, there's a guard tower right where the pointer is. Section 2 would be from there down to the railroad tracks. And part of section 1 would include the area up to Lafayette that is all new growth. I've looked at the aerials from 2006, 2007, that was all green space or even buildings at that time. So we're not removing old growth that's up in that area, but we are opening that area and cleaning that site also as part of this.
Right.
Any other questions on brush and debris before I jump to the next part? So the other part of this that we have going on is we are currently doing asbestos inspection and abatement at the Saddle Tree Factory. Saddle Tree Factory is the structure that is located on the city-owned portion of this property. It is located right here on our property, runs parallel to the railroad tracks down there. As you can see, it is a dangerous building. The exterior walls are collapsing. The main interior of the structure is empty. We have done asbestos inspection at this property. The inspection took place on January 3rd of this year. We received the results in the not to exceed for an abatement on the 12th, which was only $12,000. So we have issued the notice to proceed on removing the asbestos and materials from that site. Once that takes place, the next step would be to send the demolition out to bid, if that's what the city chooses to do. And then we would receive the bids, go through the entire bid process, and then the contract for that would be, brought back for approval at that time. That's basically it as far as my part of the update. Is there any questions for me?
Do we have a projected timeline of when all these pieces might fall into place?
On the brush removal, we have a deadline of March 31st. The reason why we're trying to move this through relatively quickly is there's some bats that like to migrate back at the end of March. So once we get those bids back on the 18th, we would move relatively quickly to bring that for approval, so we could get that action started. As far as asbestos abatement goes, we're looking at the end of this month. If we send it out to bid, probably looking at demolition in April, pending weather and everything working out perfectly. But relatively quickly, if that's what council and the city chooses to do.
Is the intent to bring these bids back to this body, or are we gonna go to full council? Because if we could bypass that, if we agree in principle here, there's really no need to.
I think given some of the time constraints, maybe going straight to council, because we had discussed, taking it through council as rapidly as possible, just to make sure we're not butting up against that timeline. So
I do know that some on council do like to get our feel for these, so if you'd like us to go ahead and recommend this to be brought to full council, that could be an action item we'll conduct right now.
I think that would be just fine.
Any other questions on that? No. Councilman Schwartz?
Is the plan to spray the vegetation, or what are we gonna do to keep it from growing back?
So on all the steep slopes and areas that cannot just be mowed, there is some green space that is just grass that's been maintained over the years. That area will not be sprayed. On anything that has a slope or is not able to be mowed, it will be sprayed. And we are just removing the vegetation down to the ground on these steep slopes so that we don't disturb anything and cause any erosion problems as well.
Well, I know we do have an excellent resource within the Parks Department, Mrs. Landwehr, that could probably help us, and I'm sure she's already been engaged with this, so she's an excellent resource that could help with that project. So the chair would entertain a motion to approve, in principle, projects moving forward.
So moved.
Okay.
We do a roll call vote.
Deacon,
Aye.
Lester,
Aye.
Spicer,
Aye.
Schwartz, Spencer.
Aye. Thank you for the update.
Scott, we have one more actually from David. I somehow got crossed up with Angie on these agendas pertaining to MSB. It was on the one that he and I discussed. Go ahead, David. I'll just give him a.
So the other part of the project that's underway is the work on Chestnut Street itself and the projects that are associated as the matching funds for the community revitalization grant. So in terms of the Lafayette Street itself, we have been sharing AutoCAD files with the state and trying to coordinate the elevation and location of Chestnut Street with regards to the plans that they're developing for the state laboratory. And so the result of those appears that we are going to be able to make those things match each other. Right now we're looking at basically Chestnut Street matching the elevation of the existing gravel road that's there today. And it looks like the state is able to match that elevation. In early December, staff and also the city administrator had reached out to the state to ask them if they would like to actually take over the project of the construction of Chestnut Street. And the reason for that is that appears that their timeline is very specific milestones that they would like to hit, and ultimately having the same general contractor in charge of both of those projects, the building and the road, would allow some closer coordination and timing among the construction of those elements. And so we've reached out to Brian Jansen, and he's indicated to us that he would be returning an answer to us at some time in the near future. As for the enhancements that would fulfill the match for the grant, we're looking at some preservation of part of the wall that it goes around the prison, particularly the piece that runs from Cherry Street down to Chestnut along Capitol Avenue. You might be aware that the inside level elevation of the prison is much, much lower than the street level at that point. And so there would need to be some type of barrier to keep people from falling off into the prison. And so we were proposing maintaining the wall there at about 2 to 3 feet in height to cap that wall, and then ultimately put a decorative fence on the top of that. And so that serves kind of two purposes. One, to safety measure to keep people from falling, and then also it is aesthetic and sort of provides that visual reminder of where the prison wall was. Another piece of that is we're proposing the installation or the continuation of the street lighting that we have on Capitol Avenue. So those are the historic acorn style lights. So continue those. They stop currently at Cherry Street. And so continue those down Capitol Avenue and turn the corner and follow the new Chestnut Street. So in all, there would be about 60 lights that would be installed there if we were to follow the same pattern that we have on Capitol Avenue currently. Additionally, we're looking at the construction of a super sidewalk greenway trail along the western side of the new Chestnut Street, and then also that trail continuing along the northern part of MSP, and ultimately come back and tie into the cul-de-sac at the end of Lafayette Street. So there is some grade issues there as we get towards Lafayette Street, and so that would require some sort of structure most likely in order to make up that grade. And so there would be some costs associated with the construction of that structure. We're also looking at building a greenway trail along Jackson Street between McCarty Street and Capitol Avenue. It had been part of a project that was proposed for an RTP grant a number of years ago. And what that will do for us is connect our existing East Branch Greenway Trail system up to Capitol Avenue and then through the bike lanes and sidewalks that exist on Capitol to the new MSP site. And so that is also being considered. After that, we have sidewalks that are being proposed along the eastern side of Chestnut Street, and then also looking at our new active transportation plan, looking at additional sidewalks as proposed along Riviera Street, and then also the reconstruction of sidewalks in various locations within the census block that would be applicable to the grant. And so then there's, on the back side of the memo, there's a kind of a breakdown of what those costs look like. And ultimately, we believe that there's enough items, or that the items there would match the $2.1 million grant. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a couple questions and kind of help inform the public as well. These trail costs, are those coming out of parks funds, or are they coming out of public works funds?
They would be coming out of the project funds that have been, so it would be sales tax funds within the city. There wouldn't be park funds.
Just to put a finer point on it, you're trying to get to the match of the 2.1 with these. And so you kind of see there at the end of his budget, it kind of says other area sidewalks. So as we step through these, very preliminary, some will be higher, some will be lower probably. And we can always add or scale back a little bit as we go, trying to get to this match point. But they have to be enhancement type improvements to do that match.
And I know when we originally discussed the Wildwood extension, we talked about a trail there and engaging the Parks Department for help with funding with that. Is there a reason why we're not engaging them with this? City Administrator?
Mr. Chairman, it's a mix of funds. The council reappropriated funds from that EDA project to this project that I think were originally those sales tax funds. Plus there was a contribution made from what we call non-ARPA funds that the council made a few years ago to MSP. So the mixture of the sales tax funds, the non-ARPA funds, the community revitalization grant, and the state of Missouri is contributing half of Chestnut Street, and then the county is also contributing on this project as well. So there's a mix of a lot of funds that are going in for this project.
Any questions?
Just that I particularly like seeing the trails are planned for along the river there, and it looks like around the cul-de-sac, perhaps a platform. That I think that'd be a great enhancement, and very much look forward to that happening.
Right, where everything is preliminary, but ultimately, I think, as Dave mentioned, there is a guard tower that exists there off of the end of Lafayette Street that I think discussions have been that could be integrated into this, where this trail comes up, and it'll be a very nice location to view the river.
Yeah, I'd hate to lose that component of it. That's a nice fixture. All right. Thank you for that update this morning. Okay, moving along to item D, Stadium and Satinwood update. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I can give a little, just very quick, and then David's got a memo in the packet, he can go through the finer details of it. I wasn't here when we had the meeting, but when we started talking about this, folks on Brandy Lane indicated they'd like to get some input, so we kind of had a special meeting with them while I was gone, looking at various options, many options, I think 10 or so, to get their feedback. We would anticipate kind of the next phase in this is to have a more widely distributed meeting for the community. It's an arterial street, obviously, connects schools, et cetera. Have another public input session that whoever's invited to that wants to have an interest. And then one of the other big steps in this is to continue to look at the flooding solutions. Those aren't obvious. When you look at it, we've had some special studies done on it after 2016 flood. We had a lot of excited people about that, and the council approved a study of that through Bar Engineering, a local firm here in town, helped us with that. So we need to go back and review that to make sure whatever we're doing there would comport. So this is still a process, quite a process yet to see what comes out of this. So nothing's been finalized. I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that.
Well, as it relates to flooding mitigation, there has been some improvements from what I understand from some neighborhoods.
Very minor, I think.
So the several years ago, we did do a stormwater project along Satinwood Drive going to the north. And so that, I do believe, was beneficial to that particular neighborhood. But the flooding that we're discussing at this point is actually the flooding of the intersection of Stadium and Satinwood. So that actually was not part of the stormwater project that was done that I think is being referred to.
So anyway, I let David go ahead and go through the
So we just
memo.
have a couple of pictures, one up on the screen. This is some flooding that took place back in 1993.
83 or 90?
I'm sorry, 83. And then this is a picture of some flooding that happened there in 1986. Where certainly there's been other times that it's flooded. I don't have any pictures of those events. Back in 2016, which was the last time it was flooded, we actually had, we don't have pictures, but we have, but there was actually trash that was caught on this lower rail of this handrail. And so the water in 2016 was deeper than even what we have here. So, so that's kind of the flooding that we're talking about. And so that's all flooding that's actually coming from the south and coming towards this area, whereas the stormwater project that I think was being referred to was a project that's to the north or behind us in this picture. So then, as Matt alluded to, we did, and here's just a kind of a map from 2016. There was flooding in various locations, but we had two structure flooding reports at that intersection there that's circled in red, which is the Stadium and Satinwood intersection. And then just kind of go through quickly, here were the 10 options that were shown to the folks at Brandy Lane during the meeting that we held back on the 14th of December. And so those are what was shown at that point in time. And so there was mixed responses to those. I think generally speaking, the Brandy Lane folks were not keen on the idea of Satinwood Lane being cut off on their side. Certainly still concerned about the possibility of taking a residential house or another residential house as part of the project. That was a big concern. But generally speaking, the most of the respondents that we heard from, picked one or other of the roundabout options that were proposed, and I think one of the citizen responses was in favor of one of the stop sign options. So as Matt indicated, we're looking at holding a larger public meeting, inviting a larger group of people and actually publicly advertising it, and continuing the efforts to look at the stormwater conditions and what can be done to help solve some of the stormwater issues at that intersection. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So if there is no roundabout design or any road enhancements for that area, what could be done in additional for flood control?
I think we still need to look into that. We don't have those flood.
No.
Yeah, well, we had a 2016 study that did show various little detention areas and things upstream, some culvert enhancements. We had our stormwater master plan from another consultant showed some improvements to some of the box culverts in this area. There's actually one under Satinwood, or is it Satinwood on that side too? Satinwood, and then showing some enhancements there to that culvert to get the water through there. So we still have to vet that out. And I think David, made a list of kind of things in your memo. Maybe just go through real quick.
Right.
Things when we looked at this in the sales tax, saying, okay, some project like Stadium, this project had a lot of issues, or this location had several issues that we're trying to cure all at one time. So what are they all?
Right. So certainly flooding, which we've already talked about. The existing traffic signal is non-compliant with current standards. There's not enough signal heads over the road, so we just have a single signal head which operates 2 lanes or controls 2 lanes. So that's not compliant. It's not ADA compliant either. We have sidewalks that come up with no sidewalk ramps, et cetera. The geometry of the intersection is another thing that we looked at. The intersection is skewed about 35, I think, degrees from square, 38 degrees from square. And so that makes it difficult for someone who is looking over their shoulder to try and see if traffic is coming, particularly for folks as they age, and some of that mobility is lost. And because of the skew too, it makes for longer crossing distances for pedestrians. And there's been, we just did a little research on the crashes. There's been 9 crashes since 2018 at that location. More than half of them have resulted in injury. And so that's something of concern. And then again, we had the opportunity to apply for a TAP grant to make some connections, pedestrian connections, back into our Greenway Trail system and improve some connections and future connections away from that intersection. So those are the reasons that we were looking at this intersection when we started looking at that corridor as a whole and what project we could tackle at this time.
And there is an option David come up with. I personally kind of like it. There is no signal. It's just a through street like every other street along here. Doesn't really affect the right of way to a great degree at all. That we could do that. There's not a signal warrant here. I'm not sure how the signal got in originally, but so there is no warrant to have a signal there. So that's still a good option. That doesn't really affect any properties there. And yet it enhances crossing. We've got a school at the top of the hill and other schools in the area in Greenway. So that's still a good option as well.
And what was that option again? I didn't hear.
Did you go
Grant,
back?
can you go back to
We
the
actually
other
have an
slide?
option that you could just remove what's there, and eventually, something's going to happen to the signal when we have other unwarranted signals around town. The one that comes to mind is over off of Industrial and I always say Shell Ridge, but it's JC Drive, I think. We had to take that signal out too instead of replace it just because it wasn't warranted. But this is a good option to not have an intersection there. It'd be just like every other intersection along the corridor. It's far from meeting the signal warrant, this intersection. So if we were to put a signal back or something like that, when it does fall into disrepair, we would ask the council to approve a special design exception for this and saying, okay, we understand it's not needed, but we're gonna do it anyway. And so that may open you up some liability if someone were to have a crash. We don't like to do that. But that's how you put a signal back. But this is really a good option too and doesn't really affect any property. And it's a cheaper option, let's face it. I mean, it's a lot less money. So we can hit a lot of the boxes and not affect properties with this design. So now, I'm not saying it's a foregone conclusion in any of these or that we're doing anything, quite frankly. We're still just studying it and bringing information back.
And I think, well.
My question is, excuse the ignorance, what was the impetus for studying this to begin with? Was it flood control for the intersection, flood control for the homeowners, or traffic control? Why are we looking at this?
All the above, really. We in our city county sales tax funds, we identified Stadium as, corridor that could use some improvement, basically from Edgewood over towards Elias area. There's been no sidewalks. Traffic control's been studied multiple times up and down the corridor. It's just an area that could use some improvement. It's our main loop around the city. This one had a lot of boxes though when you throw in the flood issue.
Now, can you control the flooding for the homeowners or for the intersection? I don't know.
We'd like to do both.
But what is feasible? What's possible?
We still have to go back and look at it.
Because I don't think those homes are ever going to be flood pro. They're right there next to the creek. But my concern is the intersection a little bit farther north down at Edgewood. I mean, that's with Edgewood and the stadium, my gosh, that's a boondoggle. I don't know if there's a signal warranted at stadium, and I really don't know if we spent all that money and disrupt all those people. If we're gaining flood control for an extra 20 people, fine, disrupt one. But a lot of money and a lot of disruption for, I don't know what we're gonna gain on it. Because I don't know how you're ever gonna flood proof those homes. I mean, they're right next to the creek. A couple of them should have never been built there, but that was.
Well, you make a good point. Yeah, some of them are in the floodplain, there's no regulated floodplain here either. That complicates things for the homeowners because when they go to buy a house, they're not notified of the issue, quite frankly. And so when we talk to the feds about our floodplain maps, we want them extended up into these urban areas. But that's still a long way off. But our consultant did produce a floodplain of the creek for us that shows these homes in it. So you are correct there. There's some elevation issues that we could deal with some of the homes, closing things up, making, doors into windows, things like that. If you're really low to floodproof your house and not have it flood. So there is that. So yeah, a lot of the issues were talked about, getting the water off the street so we can maintain this arterial street and these floods.
Councilman Spicer?
So, Matt, so them photos was from 1983?
Yeah, those are the daylight ones that we had, yeah.
Okay.
The biggest flood we had
I live
was
over in
2016.
the area and, I mean 2016, but maybe flood once every 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. Just depending on the weather, yeah.
Yeah, it's all weather related.
I could see us spending our money somewhere else on something else that's more needed, in the community.
And I think even Mr. Smith has made that comment to the residents that,
Yeah, he's made a comment or two.
They can do that. So I think they're real concerned about losing their light, their traffic signals.
I travel that quite a bit, and I guess I have some concern with the speed that cars go through there, especially without signal. The safety with with having stop signs and, yeah, I know you've got some elements in there to try and mitigate the speed, but yeah, cars really come through there, especially without a traffic signal. I had to worry about the safety.
So the chair would entertain a motion to kind of put our focus elsewhere and cease any further public engagement. I think some of the sentiment this morning that, up and downstream of Stadium could use more focus. But these are county city cooperative project dollars, so the only commitment I would like us to make is that we would focus again on a joint community city county project. So so as I stated, I think I would entertain a motion to cease and suspend any further staff actions regarding the Stadium Satinwood project.
I will make that motion.
I'll second it.
I'm sorry, who seconded?
Mr. Deacon. Could we have a roll call vote on that, please? Oh, real quick, I did want to read Councilman White's comments regarding this issue too. He wrote this on January 11th. He couldn't be here today to share this publicly. But he said, representing the citizens of the 4th Ward, I would like to make the following statement into the record of this meeting. I've been contacted by and spoken with a number of the residents surrounding the area of this proposal. I have personally walked the neighborhood of Brandy Lane and Satinwood Drive. I am familiar with the design proposals put forth by city staff, and after evaluating all the citizen input that I have received and reviewing the design proposals, I am not in favor of moving forward with this project. In my opinion, there are other areas of the intersections in the city with greater need for this type of improvements. For example, the intersection of Stadium Boulevard and Southwest Boulevard represents a much greater need for infrastructure improvement in the subject intersection. I urge the committee members to vote no on advancing the subject project to the full council. So we have a motion. We'll take a roll call vote regarding.
Can I also get a copy of that letter for my?
Absolutely.
Deacon?
Aye.
Lester?
Aye.
Spicer?
Aye.
Schwartz? Spencer?
Aye.
So we'll, to follow up then, so we'll look at other areas of Stadium and come back with a proposal.
Or we'd like to, have a discussion on where those dollars could go, if that's other areas on Satinwood, or on the viaduct too. So. Okay, item E, neighborhood traffic calming. Mr. Bangy.
Yes, we had a motion from a recommendation from the Traffic and Transportation Commission to install 3 permanent speed humps on Rolling Hill Road. And so we're asking that the committee act on that recommendation, and then also perhaps have a discussion of kind of a wider, more broad look at traffic calming measures, and if there are particular measures that we don't foresee ourselves using, and what those are, and so that as we talk to citizens, we would have a better idea of what could potentially be moving forward or not. So traffic calming in general is basically kind of can take many forms. Kind of on one end, it could be a reduction of speed limit change in speed limit signs is kind of the most minor approach, all the way up to closing or disconnecting streets to prevent through traffic or otherwise. Some of the mid-range options for traffic calming, generally include some sort of geometric change that would either narrow the street or provide some sort of lateral or horizontal offset. And so over the last number of years, particularly since COVID, we've had an increasing number of citizens approach the Traffic and Transportation Committee asking for traffic calming along a particular street or in a particular neighborhood. And so we have taken some action in those regards. A couple of examples along West Edgewood Drive coming up from JCMG. and also on Tanner Bridge Road, sort of south away from the Knights of Columbus Hall. We have added parking lane striping as an effort to make the roads look narrower. In some instances, the parking along those streets is relatively light, and so when there is no parking, the street is very wide. I think West Edgewood is probably in the 40-ish feet wide realm, and so when there's no parking, it looks like you have a 20-foot wide driving lane. So adding those stripes have shown some effect in lowering the speeds in those areas. We have some data that would show that, perhaps we're talking a mile or two an hour. Another thing that kind of goes along with those two particular streets is that they are collector streets, and people do want to be able to walk along them. Neither one of them have sidewalks, so the striping of those parking lanes gives an opportunity for cars to be pushed towards the middle, and people, I think, feel a little more confident walking, particularly when there's no cars parked in the parking lane. Other things, and so that same sort of concept has kind of found a permanent solution in town, particularly along High Street in the downtown area. Those back when that project was redone back in the late 90s, that street was narrowed. There were bump outs that were added, again, all to sort of create that calmer traffic movement. We've done bump outs in other places. Truman, about down by the Truman Building on McCarty Street, over by the Employment Security Building, we've done it. And most of those are connected with pedestrian crosswalks, but we do, and so they really haven't been used for traffic calming in general, but are more specific to pedestrian movements. Another thing that we've recently done on Sherman's Hollow, and I think I have a picture of this, Grant, is we've added a central median. It basically forms a chicane, or basically a horizontal offset. And so we've painted a center island and then narrowed the lanes, and so basically forcing people to navigate that those horizontal deflections in an effort to slow them down. We've seen some success. Actually, the pace speed, which is a 10-mile-an-hour range in which most people, the largest group of people are driving, we've actually gotten that to drop down to the speed limit. So that's good. What we weren't able to achieve with this is those outliers, those people who are speeding or had been speeding. I think perhaps they see this as a challenge and continue to speed. But the general population was affected as much as 10 miles an hour slower going through that intersection or going through that chicane. So that's one option that we've used on Frog Hollow. We've actually kind of taken that apart for this winter, so the snowplows don't have to go around some of those rubber ducks that we put up. But anyway, that's kind of the results of that traffic calming that we installed this past fall. In terms of speed humps, we really don't have any standalone speed humps in town. We have created some raised pedestrian crosswalks, which are kind of the same thing. Particularly on Kansas Street is probably the most prominent one, where we built a raised table for the crosswalk that goes to the parking lot for the ice arena, as well as the Greenway Trail crossing. And then we have the same thing, kind of a half speed hump on Jackson Street between the JC High School and the new athletic facilities. And so again, those are strictly related to pedestrian crossings and haven't been used generally. And so again, as I mentioned, the Traffic and Transportation Commission had recommended the installation of speed humps on rolling hills. Basically, that's the picture that was presented to the Traffic and Transportation Commission. We had also, at that same time, looked at doing a chicane type option, and then also we had subsequently, the committee had discussed, and we subsequently sketched what could be some sort of mini roundabout scenario as well. But with that, I'd be happy to answer questions and certainly look to address the recommendation by the Traffic and Transportation Commission.
Couple questions.
Okay, put a little bit finer point. So through the years, we've go to Traffic and Transportation Commission, and they'll sometimes recommend some of these items. Say if it costs real dollars, that has to go through the council to approve. And so we've had one over off of Hickory Street that we bid, where we did the sidewalk project. CDBG project. Yeah, we took bids on, and the council elected not to do it.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
And anyway, so, what we're trying to get to is that, so at this traffic and transportation group, they're great groups, a volunteer group that, talks to people, kind of gets that first vetting of issues. But we kind of want to be able to give them a little more clear direction that the council is going to entertain some of these physical measures or not. That would be nice to kind of give them direction, so it kind of sets their direction. If they say, oh, well, we want to get the council to install speed humps, that may get people thinking in the neighborhood one thing, and we get to the council, and that is not the direction we're going. So if we had a little more input up front, then we could kind of, I think, guide that discussion better at transportation and traffic.
I think the process is very important to lay out and understand with all the different entities that's going to have this kind of engagement.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we lead into what some of my questions. But I thought we were going to have some data on the rolling hills with our speed sign that we placed out there.
We don't have, the sign is collecting data, but we've only been doing it for a couple of days, and so we don't have anything definite. We did make note that the other day when it was snowing, that the sign actually just was picking up the snow. And so.
How fast was the snow coming down?
The snow was coming at 12 miles an hour. So,
that'd be great to report.
Yeah, so it's not perfect, and so we'll certainly have to make note of inclement weather when we start looking at that data. But we don't have anything definite from that sign at this point.
Okay, and that's kind of where I would really like to, since we, purchased that equipment, I'd really like to see some of that data come before this body, before we really make any decision on rolling hills. But as it relates to the process, so is there a process? I mean, if a neighborhood wants to have.
We don't have a defined process because the council's kind of been, over the years, some more in favor, some less in favor. Some cities that I've worked at in the past, they have a very defined, they say, yes, we'll do speed humps, but it has to meet all of these criteria. That's their, main thing where, 75% of the neighborhood has to petition for it. I can't remember it. There has to be a certain bona fide problem, that you're so many miles over the speed limit and things like that. And so that could be done, but we don't have that in place. So it's just kind of the neighborhood requesting it to our group, transportation and traffic. It's kind of vetted there, and we use some of those criteria with the neighborhood, but we don't have anything set up in code.
Do we have I guess what I'm asking for is a process of like, the neighborhood sees a need for this. They're required to get so many signatures within that neighborhood. Then either a councilman or sponsors that, or then it goes in front of Traffic and Transportation Committee.
Yeah, but we don't have it in place. We have all that detail we could do. We don't have it codified. We talked about it years ago, and the council elected not to put that in code. But if we're going to do speed humps, I think it does need to be more codified like that. It's a similar process to petitioning for sidewalks or even the stormwater thing we've come up with. A certain number of people have to agree to that they want this, because many times what the data says is speed humps go in and some of those people who signed yes don't end up liking it. So and we don't want to go in and take them in and out. We want people on board up front because you're going to spend money. They're not a lot of money, but it is some money.
I think speed humps they're a positive and a negative, and a lot of times it's very limited in time scale. But it sounds, I don't want to be putting words in staff's mouths, but it sounds like you're wanting something to either be pro speed hump for the council or not. And so that's kind of, is that what I'm?
Yeah, I think it gives the staff better direction when we're talking.
We don't want to waste staff's time.
or get residents' expectations to something and then the council has to kill it. You know, that's not a good place to be
Mr.
either.
Schwartz had. Go ahead, Mr. Schwartz.
I actually have a question. Chief Schofield looks really comfortable back there, so I'm gonna pick on him for a second, but what's the thought of, emergency services on speed bumps and kind of get your 2 cents for, police and fire and ambulance?
You know, I think as discussed, you know, there are positives and negatives. You know, certainly from a safety perspective for the neighborhood, there's a prevention potential there. But at the same time, you know, it is rough on suspension for heavy vehicles of all flavors and types. You know, as far as response times go, yeah, there's going to be a slight impact there. I don't think it's going to be dramatic from a response time perspective.
So, I appreciate that. That's kind of what I figured. So in this particular situation here, and I can't really see that far. It looks like Plymouth Rock and Concord. Why can't we just slap a stop sign up at both of those and manage the flow of traffic to that point? I know.
Like Country Club Drive.
And, well, right in front of the former mayor's house on Scenic where a stop sign appeared out of nowhere. Was put there basically to stop the flow of traffic going down Scenic Lane, so, it seems cost effective. It would certainly control the speed through there. I don't know what, the constituent thinks about that. But again, I'm not a huge fan of these speed bumps. I think emergency services were close to a hospital. I think, you know, you're talking snow plows are gonna go through and tear the hell out of them. You got emergency personnel that have to go through there on occasion. But I think if you would slap a stop sign at the roads, you're certainly going to mitigate some of the speed. I guess that's more of a question than a statement.
And the enforcement time, I mean, that's why I'm curious about the data. If we're seeing it at a significant, you know, a time frame when the speeds are occurring, then we can put enforcement in those areas for that time. And
I think it's got some of that speed data there from our counts on there. I can't quite read it. Yeah, 38 on the far to the left's one, 41 average of all speeders, I think it says. 85th percentile, 43. So that is much higher than the speed limit. I can't see that far one there, closer to Mike.
And we do have the data from that speed of when it occurred, and it didn't seem to follow a pattern as to any particular time. Obviously, morning and evening commutes were higher, but there was occurrences throughout the day.
Right, which it was odd in that parking is allowed on both sides of that street, and that street is actually narrower than what we would recommend for parking on both sides. And so, given that what should have been some friction created by those parked cars, you know, that really didn't seem to hold sway in this instance. So that was a little odd. But yeah, so we, as Britt said, we were looking at, you know, patterns. Does this speeding normally happen during the day when there is less parking on the street, or does it happen in the evening? It didn't really, there wasn't any clear, didn't seem to be any clear reasoning behind when the speeding was happening. But in terms of the stop signs, they wouldn't be warranted by the MUTCD. And so typically when you put in unwarranted stop signs, you breed contempt for stop signs. And so ultimately,
stop signs now.
So ultimately people will realize that they're coming to an intersection where they never or hardly ever encounter anyone else. And so they'll start to ooze through them and then pretty soon not really stop at all. And so putting stop signs where they're not warranted creates a situation where you're actually creating an unsafe situation because people ignore them.
Unwarranted stop signs create liability issues.
Well, I would prefer the oozing versus the speeding.
you know, your comment with the narrow street, I want to get pedestrians off the roadway. And I think this is an excellent example of sidewalk enhancement program here for the homeowners, to get them off the street. You shouldn't be walking your dog and putting yourself at risk on the street.
I agree.
So,
I would like to interject something else, that they put that sign up for data and people come off the wider street speeding and they don't have any data from that direction, and they need data from that direction. In other words, coming from the hospital side, they need another one of those temporary things and giving data, because that's, people come up that hill and they hit it at 35 or 40 because they're trying to get up the hill, and they keep going. And I think you need data from that direction. And again, stop signs, the side streets, people are running stop signs on that. I mean, what, and why, I mean, like I said earlier, we cannot allow people just to break the law.
and that's my comment, that it's a enforcement issue.
Yeah.
And we may need to have more police presence in those designated times than when we know what's going on.
I agree.
And if that data is, from that equipment that we just purchased, I know it's just brought online for only a couple of weeks, I guess, my understanding. So there's still time that we need to put that into use and collect the data that we need. Councilman Lester.
Yeah, I just want to speak a little bit from experience. I'm not a big fan of speed humps, but I know that they do work in terms of slowing the traffic. By one of the parts, speed humps because of speeding, and they certainly work. I know in my brother's neighborhood in Knoxville, they have those low-rise, wide speed bumps, and they certainly work in the neighborhood. So I know they work. I know from experience on Hickory Street, I think the process is needed, because we got well over 70% of all the residents on Hickory Street sign a petition for speed humps. From the Transportation Commission, and was approved, and then was not approved by the council. Yes, we have sidewalks, and they're great, and we need those because the sidewalks are terrible. But that hasn't done anything with those speeders that speed on Hickory. And it's not just, people that sometimes those speeding cars get out of control and go up on people's walkways, almost to their house. That's happened. So anyway, I do think there should be a more formal process when it's warranted, and that's what's called for, that you have opportunity to approve these type of slowing measures for safety. And right now, we don't really have a process. Like I said, we went through all the process, and then it was not approved, and people are still upset about that.
Councilman Spicer.
I'm with Councilman Swartz. I'm not real big with the speed bumps, but they speed everywhere in town. Maywood's like a race strip too. I mean, I'm out of my house plenty of times. They, as hilly as it is over there, I mean, they're hitting 50 or whatever it is going down the hill, Public safety has put, signs over, their lights or whatever, you're going at speed or whatever it is. But I'm with Swartz too, is because, that's hard on our equipment. It's hard on the response time for safety, for people's safety. 1 second could save somebody's life. But I'm with you guys. Something needs to be done, because I have the same solutions on Maywood and other places that I go. So we need to find something. And as being public safety chair, I want to find something that we can do that makes sense, because they are going to break the law. If you put stop signs up, you can put them up, but they're gonna run through them. They're gonna do that, but at the end of the day, we have to try something and see if it works. Not doing nothing's not gonna work. So we feel you. I mean, we wanna help you. But we have to find a solution that makes sense for everybody, you know, for everybody. Cause I'd love to have it on Maywood and Tower and that, because somebody's gonna get killed one of these days. People drive too dang fast. You know, and it's these younger kids and these, you know, they think it's okay until they hit somebody, and not having sidewalks or something for you guys to walk. But I'm with Councilman Lester too. Even if you have sidewalks, they're gonna run up on the curb, they're gonna hit you, or whatever they're gonna do. I mean, I just think that we have to find a solution. So, just so you guys know, I am your councilman, and I am working on something. So.
I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
So, what's the timeline then on these radar and enhanced speed zone things that Tia mentioned to us? That, I mean, she put up the first one in my yard, and she was saying, hey, we're gonna put this up. So it's been there about a week, maybe a little more than a week. And she said at some certain time, the second one was gonna go up at the corner of Plymouth Rock. That has not happened. Did both signs get purchased at the same time? What's the delay on getting that second one set up? I'm sitting in my recliner, I can see that the speed, and it's consistently between 31 and 37 all the time.
And what is the speed?
30 miles an hour.
30 miles an hour,
Right.
okay. And
So.
to be fair, sometimes
It's
citizens,
an arterial, it goes to the hospital, we get, going to the high school, we get all that. City bus even has a route through there.
Right.
So I've talked to the previous, Mr. Stegman's predecessor. City buses are going above the posted speed limit through there. He can track it on his satellite. So when you've actually got city staff breaking the law, but they've got a schedule to meet, I mean, it's highly complicated. My question is, what's the timeline on the second stop radar enhanced visual? What kind of timeline are you looking at? Are you looking at a full month's worth of data? Is the data then gonna go to the police department? Because we've talked to them ad nauseum. And it's a point and finger. They say, talk to the city council says it's not our problem, talk to the chief.
well, the city council, to be fair,
Right.
we're not saying it's not our problem. We're not pointing
And they're
fingers.
not saying it's not their problem either. It just,
We are trying to come up with a solution.
and I appreciate that, truly.
Timeline, I agree. What's the timeline?
Let's let staff ask, because that was my understanding when we reported those signs out.
We were not, supply chain issues are still an issue, all right? We found this one, which from a company that we were not familiar with, that was on the shelf, and we bought it. We didn't want to buy a second one because they do have, I mean, they're about $5,000. These are not small expenses. So we did purchase the first one to make sure that it was give us a product that we would use and like, because we didn't have any experience with this particular company or in this particular brand. Now we have it up, it is operating. We found some functionality that we would like to have a little bit different, but it's 6 to 8 weeks out on the ones that we would prefer to have. But we could certainly order a second one just like what we have now and probably have it within a couple of weeks. We haven't made that step yet, but we could, as early as today, order that.
Well, I think we're at a point where we're gonna say we're gonna be data-driven. We need the data in front of us to be able to make some of these decisions.
But for the record, we have other ways of doing speed studies, of which we've already done with the hoses, and it actually gives us, we believe, it doesn't pick up snow. So, so there is some advantage to using it with the hoses because they're much less obtrusive. The problem is, in the wintertime, we've got snow coming, we can't put hoses out because the snow plows are going to take those out.
Yeah, a lot of this is weather dependent. And on these signs, one of the issues was we have data, that's for sure, but the people driving it can't see what the hose says, and so I think the mayor brought it up to us and said, hey, maybe we should try some of these. So we ordered the one, and it's also a way to inform the person driving, hey, I am going too fast. Maybe I should think about slowing down. And so, so yeah, I think our goal was to get two of them eventually. And of course, weather dependent with the snow, we're counting snowflakes and every other thing, but, so not a great time to do it, but.
There were some other options that I think you presented at the last meeting, like not necessarily a chicane, but.
Right, so we had looked at, yes, it actually is a chicane.
Sorry.
And so again, that would kind of function the same as with the center median configuration that we put on Sherman's Hollow, except it's slightly different, but it's the same, it does the same thing. It basically forces a horizontal deflection so that a person would have to slow down in order to make it through there. And then we had also looked at the possibility of the creation of mini roundabouts at Concord, or I can't remember, is that, and Plymouth Rock. So those were the two other options that were discussed.
I don't think that's gonna be able to be addressed immediately with that option there, but the chicane, is that using the ducts again, like what was done?
Yes.
Sherman's Hollow, and that had a lot of negative too, so.
It's loving and hate, you know, some people love it, some people hate it, so.
And your all's determination is that there must be some kind of physical barrier to guide that chicane. It just cannot be striping on the roadway, right?
Correct.
And it's to that point, you know, we still have the striping on Gettysburg, but if you go out there and watch the traffic, people don't obey the striping. They just go on through it. We remove the ducts for the winter.
And it was a trial rating as well. It's not a permanent solution, but they got the data on it and it did slow folks down, as David pointed out, what was out there. You could make it a more permanent solution where you just build the curbs and that way and call it good. And but we wanted to get the data to, you know, so we can talk about it intelligently. Same with the signs, you know, are the signs really going to have an effect or not?
And the mini roundabout, you know, to Councilman Schwartz's point of a four-way stop, it's similar to that, but it's a legal oozing through this, but it requires people to slow down and navigate around that central island.
That, if we're going to do physical improvement though, that will be more expensive.
Yeah.
So there is an expense side to this too. Yes. So I guess the question is, what we were trying to get at, I think, is we'll continue to work with the neighborhood and get the signs up and get the data and go through that. But if, would the council, would the group, not the council committee like to see us have a proposed, like a draft ordinance to make things like this codified, or, you know, just kind of continue to do what we're doing now?
I think there definitely needs to be a process, and I think eventually we could even tie in if we're a pro speed bump community or not.
Right.
And then that we can then focus on that process. And it's we're not addressing the immediate need that this neighborhood is having, but if we're gonna use the data and we're committed to that, then let's get that going.
So I think like next month, we could bring back that, you know, it's a model code that other people use, if that's what you want, and talk about it more.
I think the sentiment is though, maybe looking at it from not a community speed hump approach. Other alternatives is what I'm getting at.
So could you go back to the other slide with, yeah, this one. So instead of something like that, you could put up something permanent where it starts there, where it's like a little place where gardening and, you know.
Right, so it could be, it could be that those could be sort of permanent bump outs, curved with landscaping.
Just more yard.
Yeah,
right.
A little yard there, and then, yeah, I think something like that on both.
As I recall the model code, and I haven't done this in quite a while, but it's kind of like speed humps, or no, excuse me, it's kind of like we did on the one we put in temporarily. You kind of, you study it, you put it in temporarily, see what happens. You can get to speed humps as well. They're costly. It's almost as cheap to just build them out of asphalt, but, and try that. see what your effect is before you go permanent, and that's kind of on this Sherman's Hollow. Same thing, we've tried it, we have the data. It could be made permanent if the council wanted us to do that. There's some cost there, but it also disrupts the neighborhood too, to some degree.
Yeah, I mentioned that because I understand that you have to have something physical, otherwise it's not gonna work. But I think something at the front end of that to force.
So with this, you take people's parking away in front of their house, but they have to, you'd have to get them to agree, hey, this is going in, are you in favor or not,
But it's also, it gives them protected parking.
True.
If you have something right at the beginning there. I don't know.
So if this is an option, can we get a cost on this option for this neighborhood? Is this something that?
Well, I'd like to ask a few questions in regards to Mr. Lester's comments. In regards to David's, the width of the road, a lot of the residents don't like the chicane because you're directing traffic into someone else's mailbox, potentially as they're coming out. So if we went to a part where you blocked traffic from parking on one side, like you do on Morrow, you can only park on one side of the street. That opens up those residents from having been displaced because our population is getting older. They can't see very well. You come out, literally you can look one way, 3 seconds later you pull out and there's someone right on your tail. 3 seconds, that's what we're dealing with. So if we could move parking to one side or the other, I think that might be an option. Nobody liked this idea, and we all voted to get the speed bump because it was an option that David and Tia said it was the most practical because they voted against they did not recommend the stop signs for various reasons. So my questions are, if we get the data, would this conversation then with the residents go back to the traffic committee then? Because it seems like this committee is a little higher on the food chain for conversations like this. Is that what you're getting at, sir?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see us having to go back to TNT, quite frankly. I mean, we could get, what data that they're gonna present to TNT, they can present to us, you know,
Well,
so.
I think the residents' input to figure out where we're gonna go, because obviously these are our yards. If we go with the sidewalk, we don't have much of a front yard anyway.
Right.
Then you put in, I don't know what the guidelines are for a sidewalk, but it seems like this committee is more important to have conversations like you did with Wildwood than you do with sidewalks, with the customer.
And my question would be with you, which side of the street would you be willing to, vacate? So, there's a lot of steps that you have to go through to kind of help guide us. For this
Based
plan.
on current population, who's living in what houses, my side of the street, which is 1925, I've still got 2 teenage kids at home that are driving. And then 1917, the Reeds, they've got 3 or 4 families living in it. It's all together, like nieces kind of thing. But there's consistently 3 or 5 cars in front of my house and his house. There's maybe 1 or 2 on the other side, but that's more of a dope house kind of thing. So I think if you kept the parking to what would be the east side of the road, it wouldn't be a stretch to get that to be approved. It's just because we're doing it already. But I'm the community mowing guy. I mow on both sides of the road for different people. There's not much front yard, so if you're gonna go with a sidewalk, you're taking out quite a bit of chunk of real estate, depending on which side of the road you put that on. If you put them on both. So I don't know. Nobody really liked the speed bumps, but that was a viable option, and we wanted traction to go forward with something. So that's what we voted on.
Again, if we gotta have a priority, and if pedestrian safety that's a priority for me, that's a top priority.
Absolutely.
So if we can get them off the street,
I agree
get them
with
on
this
sidewalks.
Right, you get them off the street, yeah.
So.
But then you've got money involved, so.
Well, we can't always have our cake and eat it too, as far as, I mean, the council can be not pro speed bump, which is probably the cheapest alternative.
Yeah.
But it does impact other services that we provide within the city. So, you know, we'll have to take that sacrifice.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to making the sacrifice, I'm just.
I mean, that is us as elected officials, we just have to, you know, make that happen, so.
Thank you for the time.
Well, no, thank you, but if you could kind of solidify that approach, if we did just make parking on one side so that the neighborhood is kind of well informed.
Down where Pat lives, he lives where that third pink block is, closer to Yorktown. They do tend to park on both sides of the street down there, so I'll have him ask his neighbors, what their thoughts are on that, and maybe we can get back to this. So thank you.
And just feel free to get back, I mean, if you want to direct.
Yeah, we can talk to Mr. Wright or Mr. Spicer.
Yeah.
Fine. Yeah.
Okay. Wheels of government turn awfully slow sometimes. We sympathize with your cause, believe me, so. We're gonna come up with a resolution for it.
Would you like to see that draft code next meeting then, or not?
No, I'd really like us to try to focus on.
Just this neighbor?
On something, so we can get some closure for them.
Gotcha.
But I think that is a bigger picture item that we need to address. Okay. Sherman's Hollow. You kind of touched on it a little bit.
Right, it's kind of all wrapped up in one.
Thank you. Item F, parking fine ordinance. Mr. Smith.
Yes, as the committee is aware, we recently increased parking fees and fines. As staff was going through and evaluating and implementing that change, we found out that parking fines had previously been set in kind of two different ways. One was through code, and the other was more administratively through the court system. As a result, we believe that is a bit confusing and probably not, well, after talking with our council, probably not the best approach. So what you have here is what I've termed kind of a cleanup in our parking fine. And also I have a bit of an error in the data that I presented in the exhibit. I've listed expired meter twice, and unfortunately one of those is incorrect. So if this is looked, we've actually already corrected it on one that would be presented to council on Monday, Tuesday, assuming the council is, assuming the committee looks favorably on this particular issue. But as I said, we're just adding a few of the fines into this particular schedule and ensuring the consistency between what we're doing in the field and this schedule match well. Happy to answer any questions.
So you're asking for this committee's endorsement of this?
That would be staff's request. And also we're trying to implement all these fee increases by February 1st. Given that this issue has actually already been discussed, consideration for a check mark at the next meeting would be requested as well.
Mr. Schwartz,
Yeah, I just had a couple questions on just kind of parking in general. Have we ever instructed or asked parking enforcement to be a revenue generator for the city as a mission?
I'm sorry, can you ask that again?
Has parking enforcement ever been asked to be a revenue generator for the city as a mission, or their?
Absolutely not.
Okay. A couple meetings ago, I asked you to have the parking people interject a little bit of common sense when it comes to enforcement. And still, well, first off, and I'm not complaining because I was there too long. I got a ticket the other day between Madison and Monroe. I was the only vehicle parked on that block. The only one. I got a picture of it. And I got a parking ticket. That, to me, is not common sense. Parking enforcement should be out there enforcing High Street where we don't have meters for some reason, and moving people along in instances during session and things like that where parking is an issue. The parking guy was out there yesterday taking license plate numbers of people that were working at the food bank. I mean, that's just ridiculous. I mean, parking enforcement should be enforcing parking, not either attempting to harass our citizens, or people that come to this city willing to work or to buy things. If you're the only vehicle parked on a block, there's no sense in somebody monitoring how long you're there. These folks drive around the same blocks every day, all day. They know the folks that are setting up parking for residential purposes, and I know that's been an issue. But, I mean, it's harassment. There's no two ways about it. It's either they're bored and they ain't got enough to do, or there needs to be less of them. That's just the bottom line. So I think there needs to be an increased focus on High Street. I know some of the businesses are still complaining about parking there, but this is the last time I'm saying it before next budget, that I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it.
Councilman Swartz, honestly, it's difficult for us to ask the lowest paid employee of the city to make decisions and which ordinances they will or won't enforce. We're happy to enforce whatever ordinance the council chooses.
There just needs to be less of them then.
But, you know, and you ask about High Street, staff has been directed to not enforce with a vehicle on High Street. As a result is a walking enforcement, which is an extremely intensive, long process. In 90 minutes is almost impossible to enforce that way. We're happy to do whatever the council asks.
Excuse me. I mean, I don't know why this seems so damn difficult. Common sense to me is that if there's one or two cars parked in a particular area, pass it by and go find somewhere where the parking is full and monitor it. I just don't get it.
I mean, I'll have to piggyback on to Councilman Swartz. A good friend of mine owns a business uptown on Side Street. Pouring down rain. It was 8 o'clock. Went into her store. Came back 5 minutes later. Oh, no cars on either side of the street. 5 minutes after 8, she went back out to the car to move it. It had already gotten a ticket. I mean, we always thought that one was harassment. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, it's just ridiculous. If there's no cars there, I thought parking enforcement that keeps the cars moving, not just to ticket a car because it's sitting there. That was just egregious. And then your thing too is, I mean, this is pouring down rain and didn't put meter in because they had to put stuff in the store. Went back at and almost like they were sitting there waiting for it. Paid the ticket and said, well, I was wrong, but it was a bad taste of people.
That's all I got.
Councilman Lester.
So maybe related, do we ever look at use of spaces of parking meters? I mean, there's some places where I'm going to a place for business, but that has meters and so parked just a block away where there's not meters, but I never see any parking in that block that has meters. So I'm just wondering, do you ever look at our meters in terms of utilization? Maybe we have places where we don't even need meters because they're not really used that much.
We have done that in the past. We've removed meters, the lower utilization meters in different areas. That review has been done in the past.
We haven't done it lately.
We haven't done it lately.
Okay, I don't know if it relates to this issue or not, but
And it could be. I think it does. I think Councilman Porter's comment was, if we're not getting a lot of parking on a block consistently, maybe we don't need meters or any restriction there for really. And then folks that work downtown, we've tried to make areas that if I'm a waiter at Madison's, and I don't want to rent a space in the garage, but I could park a couple blocks down for free or very low cost, meter all day, that we've tried to accommodate folks so they have an option to park. My daughter works downtown as a 16-year-old, and I'll just go down a block here and you'll park there as long as you need to work there that night, you know.
So do you know how long ago was the last evaluation?
It was all probably tied up in it's not a perfect science either, because you have to have a meter to count how many dollars are in the meter and then divide by spaces, and we do some math and voodoo math and come up with kind of a utilization is how we did it back in the day. And that was probably around the time we adjusted all the rates, 15 years ago or whatever.
We've had some other spots since then, but it's been probably 7 to 10 years since it's been done last.
Might be time to do another.
Well, certainly post-COVID, there's obviously a change in parking. But, to the point, we just have a difficult time. Our officers are often accused of targeting people. They do have a route that they drive, and we try to ask them to be as impartial as they can. And to interject partiality into it is difficult on a very low-paid employee. We're asking them to try to do a very difficult job. They're happy to do whatever the council directs. If we don't want to enforce in certain areas, we certainly can do that and would appreciate by resolution or changing in code so that we have a clear direction. We're not trying to be obstructionists here at all. We're just trying to do what you want.
What was the impetus of taking the meters off Hive? How did that all come about?
I was not working for the city at that time, so I'm probably not the best person to give you details. However, I believe it was to promote retail development within the downtown and provide for free parking for folks doing retail work. And at the same time, they had a higher parking fine rate for the non-metered area, for disobeying, disobeying is the wrong word, but to not complying with the time limit on the street. So that, I believe, was the impotence. That was done in 2003, 2002, timeframe.
Yeah, I just started working here at the time, but it was through that streetscape project era when it got started. But that was basically what the issue was, trying to spur retail restaurant development downtown.
Get that turnover.
Yeah, and then the time limit was to get the turnover. So, okay, if you have.
Prior to that, it had been 2 hours, it went to 90 minutes and free.
But it's no different than a meter, right? If you're.
Yeah, you're basically just clocking the time, and then, instead of through quarters and feeding them a meter, you're just taking license plates at this point. And we used to use chalk, but taking and watching, if they're there longer than that time frame.
Can I get an overlay of where our meters are? Nothing, don't reinvent the wheel.
There's a maps on our website. I can send you a link to it.
Yeah. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's just time we get rid of nobody cares change anyway. Let's face it. Maybe Jack does, but Jack's a hunter.
Cash out.
Maybe it is time. They're an eyesore in my opinion, and maybe it's just time we got rid of a few of them.
Councilor?
Yeah, and I certainly understand some of the sentiment behind the discussion, but in my world, what some people call common sense enforcement, other people would say is selective and arbitrary enforcement, and that's where cities get in trouble. That's why the national probably best practice is if you see a violation, you write the violation, to avoid situations where people claim, well, you're only enforcing against X, you're only enforcing against Y, you don't enforce against these people. Discrimination. That's why generally the answer is to codify and regulate what you want to regulate. And if you don't want to regulate something, then don't regulate it. But asking for what one person says is common sense enforcement, another person says it's selective enforcement, that creates a bucket of issues that if we're gonna get into, we'll be able to get into with our eyes wide open. So, wherever that's working.
And as it relates to enforcement / regulation, if this was done in the private sector, do those kind of get muted somewhat?
In the private sector, what do you mean?
If the utility was,
No, it really doesn't
sold to-
change
sold to
because,
the private.
because ultimately, and probably the best model is the city of Chicago. City of Chicago sold their parking utility to a private company, but it's still through the government impetus that regulation is possible. Essentially, they just said, if you enforce this for us, you can have all the revenue from it as well. And so I don't think it fixes the issue because ultimately it's a government function to enforce regulations like that. I don't think introducing a private party changes that in any way.
I think the public is well aware and hope they're sympathetic to our plight is that parking is very complicated. One action you take adversely affects the other. So I know this body is committed to the topic and coming to some resolution for it. So I think maybe we're at a point where this body might need a work session to really delve deep into this and work on it. Kind of the piecemeal it here and there is just not working. So, any other comments before we move on? You wanted that as an action item.
Is there any action that the committee would like to take on this particular issue?
No, so moved. If we're talking about the fine, yeah.
I think a study of our meter utilization may be in order.
Specifically on the ordinance that is presented, I was just asking if the committee would like to take any action on it.
We do have a motion, first and seconded. Roll call vote.
Deacon.
Aye.
Lester.
Aye.
Spicer.
Aye.
Schwartz. Spencer.
Aye. Okay, item 5, other general business, new hybrid Gillig bus update. Mr. Stegman.
The second of the 2 hybrid Gillig buses arrived last week. We're currently in the process. The Gillig rep is here doing the post-delivery inspection, going through everything. We've got to get some training and stuff for the mechanics and the drivers on it. It's quite a bit different, especially on the mechanic side. It deals with a lot of high voltage and different things that goes through the bus. We were supposed to have that training on Tuesday, but with the prediction of snow and everything, the mechanics would be tied up with taking care of the snow plows and things there, so we postponed that, trying to get that rescheduled. Just got a few things to go over before we get them out in service. It may be a couple weeks, hopefully not that long before we can get them in service. Also, we do have one out here just by the east of City Hall on McCarty Street, if people would like to take a look at it. It is, another thing we have to do is some checking. The battery packs are on top of the bus. These buses are almost 2 foot taller than our current buses, so we will have to look at a little tree trimming around town, but minor things we got to do to get that done first.
Yeah, the colors are slightly different, so they'll be a little bit noticeable if you know what you're looking at. And so anyway, we can park one out here if you want to go check it out.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Oh, sorry.
Ask about a couple of things. I noticed we talked about Madison Street upgrade, and I noticed it's on the status sheet, but I don't see it on the sales tax H document that we received. Is that oversight, I guess?
I'm sorry, which documents are you referring to?
Well,
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's not there because ultimately we haven't really done anything more than present it to you as an option and haven't really programmed any money to it specifically. And we haven't spent any money on it, and so it just hasn't made it to that sheet yet.
But I think I thought we as a body did redirect those funds from the Monroe Street Phase 2, we call it, to Madison.
Yes, I think that's correct. It's just that we haven't done anything more with that project, and so it just hasn't made it onto the sheet yet.
I was at trail users meeting last night, and I see you have about Southwest and Lafayette crosswalks, and at one time we were talking about Edgewood crosswalk, and they were asking about status of that crosswalk.
Right, so both of those are TAP grant projects, and so we had worked on the crosswalk one first, and so it is actually out to bid. The bid's open on that on the 23rd of this month. And we are actively working on the Edgewood project, and so that's part of a larger trail construction that would complete the 179 bypass trail. And so we hope to have that design completed in the April timeframe, and then would have that contract hopefully by the 1st of September.
So it's bound up in the 179 bypass trail. That's part of that project.
Correct.
Thank you. And just wanted to ask about Boggs Creek Trail, which I see is really important for the east side. Really great thing to have. Just wondering, is it in jeopardy because the Parks Commission has delayed action on it or not?
I have, so the Parks Commission has spoken about that project over, I think, the last 3 of their meetings. And we have verified with MoDOT that they will need to have an answer as to whether or not they'll accept those grant funds by the 15th of February. So the commission would have an opportunity at their next normally scheduled meeting on the 12th of February to make that decision. So after that point, I think MoDOT would take that grant back and.
If I may, at the meeting yesterday with Parks, it's not 100% that are going to accept the grant. That's a $500,000, and it's going to be probably another $500,000 to fix the grant. Over $1 million just to go 2,000 foot. I mean, it's an expensive project to get a really short distance. 2 bridges to be made, almost $500,000 for 2 bridges. So the Parks is thinking, do they really want to commit $500,000 of their money to this project? So it's a big discussion. I mean, yeah, it's not, state's only going, what, 48 or 52%? We get 48 or one, vice versa.
I understand.
It will be the most expensive trail project that they've undertaken so far. It's a lot of discussion, a lot of money.
No, I understand. It's important.
Well, we don't know if it's important. We don't know who's gonna use it, because it's a dead end. I live within 500 yards of that place. Nobody's down there. So, I mean, it's, in my mind, it's, well, I'll just let it be. I don't have a vote on it.
The commission is still entertaining that. I do have a question as it relates to that project. Your name was kind of on that grant application and on that. With the administrative fee issue that we've had, you do spend some time on parks related project. So does that go into account when we're talking about?
Well, I think we look at them in terms of these particular parks projects also have a transportation element to them. And so we're looking at these trails as being transportation as well as recreation. And so there isn't any particular accounting that goes along with that, simply that we see them that way.
So it'd be part of their administrative fee that they get other services of the city, including us, law, whoever.
Yeah, that's my point. So, and I think that's a great addition of service that they receive.
Yeah, it's significant.
We had a question from the gallery real quick on
Yes. When it's appropriate time, can I say something about old business or something?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we'll get you. Thank you. All right. Any other questions related? We kind of got off off the agenda there. So let's go to reports on neighborhood service grant updates. Ms. Senzi, due to time, could you just maybe update the highlights of your report? Of any significant changes from when we got forward?
Sure. I literally have the report highlighted for anything that has changed within the past, since the last time we presented. And honestly, most of our work that we've been doing is a lot of paper pushing. We've been doing a lot of environmental review wrap-ups of some of our projects. We've had to update a lot of our policies and procedures. I do want to note that the council approved our 2024 Community Development Block Grant policies and procedures for this year. We're probably going to come back to council with further updates, simply because we had to clean up some of the results from our audit that we had in 2023. Also, the federal government is putting out updates for Davis-Bacon and for their uniform grant guidance, so we want to make sure that we stay on top of that. We did have a meeting with realtors and lenders on January 8th to provide technical assistance on some of those policy and procedure updates, including lead-based paint and housing counseling services. CDBG disaster recovery. As most of you know, Stronghold Landing did receive MHDC LIHTC commitments. So we're working with DED for next steps, which will include starting that environmental review process. Historic Preservation Fund, the Paul Bruin Grant. We have all but 4 of our projects are actively working through their procurement phase, and they're bidding out for consultants and contractors. The 206 to 210 East High Street, the old JCP building. I need to reach back out one more time with the property owners to see if they were able to provide any structural survey that demonstrated that they did not have structural issues with that building. If they cannot provide that documentation, we will deobligate that grant, and reach back out to the remaining 5 projects to see if they have any cost overruns, and then take it back to the Historic Preservation Commission for recommendations on where remaining funds can go after that deobligation is completed. Really no updates on the Historic Preservation Fund design guidelines. We're still working with our consultant, which is H3 Studios. The West Main Phase 2 architectural survey, we are getting a grant amendment where the SHPO is giving us a little bit of extra funding to do further research. Our consultant there is Stantec. They are surveying the Lower Jefferson subdivision along West Main.
Real quick on SHPO, as it relates to Simonson project, at our next meeting, I would like this body to show, to present to the full council a resolution to show support of that project for their design changes for parking. Mm-hmm. And so if we could work on that.
Yeah, I've worked with DJ Drury a little bit on that issue. The State Historic Preservation Office is undergoing some staff changes. Their director is retiring on Friday. I'm not sure what that means as far as the tax credits. I also know that that specific tax credit reviewer is also either no longer working there or has shifted another job. So there may be some opportunity to work specifically on that issue.
And I think it would help with the full council showing support for that change, and so that we can move that thing forward.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. The state CDBG CV, the Cole County EMS project, is currently active. We have sent in 1 reimbursement request and are currently in the middle of processing reimbursement request number 2 and 3. Transformational housing projects, also another state CDBG CV project. We're having some issues with the environmental review record. We have to re-engage the tribes because we did not have the mayor sign our letters. We signed the letters. So we have to circle back and have the mayor sign the letters, and that adds probably another 45 days to the entire process. We talked about the community revitalization grant updates. Something I don't know that we touched on, I'm not sure if the council or this body is aware of. We did have to remove the proposed demolition of Housing Unit 5 and Housing Unit 2 from that grant scope because it's of site control issues. The state will not allow us to use state ARPA funds to demolish state property. So we had to, that's a lot of the reasons why we're doing some of the expanded greenway and more of the connectivity public infrastructure components, so that we will shift and update, but that also leaves us with the state needs to take care of their.
So that is the understanding now that we're released from that obligation.
It's, yeah, so the state is kind of, OA is kind of back checking with DED on that. But that is a change from what DED had previously kind of indicated to us in the application process. So what Ms. Cindy is relaying is 100% accurate, but OA is kind of working directly with their sister agency to see if that's the kind of final position. But for the city's purposes, we've kind of pushed that as far along as we can. We've gotten our final answer, and yeah, that is a change from what the council has previously seen, and kind of would, like we said, release us from any obligation to do that. Yeah.
And so those buildings will remain.
Remain is probably something to be determined. There's a corresponding state project that's going along with our project, and so I think the thought and hope is that the demolition of those two state structures can proceed along with due progress. It's probably the best I can give you. As at least a first phase of the state's project over there. So, but the city and the state are both concurrently running projects over there. State's procurement and funding mechanisms just kind of naturally make them go a little bit slower. But I don't want to say that since the city's not doing it, 2 and 5 are definitely. I don't think that is the plan, but a lot of that is going to be determined by the legislature and the executive branch of the state.
Councilor Schwartz.
I understand that the wheels of government move slow, but when's the last time an inmate was in there? 20 years?
At least.
I mean, nothing moves that slow, not even this government. And this is ridiculous, and I'm not on the city's part, but can I get copies of the correspondence with OA specifically concerning the ARPA funding not being eligible to be used for demolition?
It's DED, but yeah, sure.
Either one. That'd be great, thanks.
And to piggyback off that, that's kind of the reasoning behind the strategy of letting the state kind of be the lead on some of the information we were given earlier.
On Housing Unit 5?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have site control, like she said. I think they do plan on tearing it down along with Housing Unit 2, but right now we have no agreement with them on the land that Housing Unit 5's on. So it's not something that they want to give us, and not something that is in our scope of work right now.
Thank you, sir. Continue.
Yes. Okay. We are still working with the local schools to participate in our education campaign that designs the wraps on the ripple bends. This is kind of a double dip. We get to do recycling education as well as maintenance. We are working on our energy efficiency and conservation block grant formal application that's due in April 24. And that will be for a energy efficiency planning document that we can utilize to get larger funds for implementation. And that is really all of the highlights that we have for today. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of Ms. Cindy? Thank you. All right, quarterly sales tax projects report and project status, Mr. Bangy.
Yeah, so I have in the packet the spreadsheet that shows the dollars that we have spent from sales tax H on various projects over the last quarter. And then also, at the last meeting, you had requested some type of report on where we stood with various projects. And so we developed a little colored matrix that hopefully will convey some of that information. And then if the committee finds that useful, perhaps we could also have that on our website. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
There was a question there. All right. Any questions from the committee on that report?
And I think, Councilman Lester, I think a couple of you are quite, I have that noted, and we'll take care of that.
Thank you.
I know we keep beating this horse several times over. The Monroe Street Phase 1 project, where are we at in that as far as design and?
So so at one point in time, we had talked with the committee about hiring a consultant to help us with designing of retaining walls along that street. Ultimately, in the discussions that we had with the consultant, we began to realize that the costs of those, not only the walls themselves, but the design itself was extraordinary. And so we have gone back and are looking at a different design, ultimately laying the slope back on the western side and doing a shortened wall on the eastern side. So that design is moving along. We're working through with the passage of PROWAG, the accessibility issues on the right of, that talk about the new federal regulations about ADA access on right-of-way. We're working through that with the traffic signal that we're going to be installing, because that's all new to us in terms of the requirements for the signal to basically talk to you, to tell you when it's safe to cross the street. So some of those details, but ultimately we hope to have that project, the design of that finished this spring, and be bidding it in the summer.
And again, shifting those dollars from the Monroe Street Phase 2 project, two-way lane, to Madison Street, are we kind of doing some preliminary?
At this point, we don't have the staff to be working on that just now.
Because that was another project we were going to do in-house. That was my understanding.
We'll have to evaluate that as time passes to see whether or not we have the capacity to do that. Most likely we would, but certainly it's something that's going to have to take place in the coming years, and wouldn't be something that we could address currently.
Years, okay. All right, I think we did have one more comment from the gallery this morning on topic.
If you don't mind.
No, please come forward and state your name, please.
Okay. Martin Phillips. I live on 2205 Brandy Lane. And this is concerning some comments about the previous discussion about the Stadium and Satinwood intersection. After hearing a lot of discussion, as best I can understand, is the council seems to be wanting to put this project further back on the agenda, based on wanting to know more about flooding issues and whatever. Is that correct? Did I hear that correctly?
Actually, we are not moving forward with the project at all, with as far as any kind of
like around
Now, the flood control, I think we were still kind of interested with.
Okay, that's what I thought I understood, but I just want to make sure. Well, of course, I'm a retired engineer, civil engineer, so I'm concerned about safety. I live there. Our backyard parallels with Stadium, and we know that that's a raceway, any way you put about it. I mean, even though you got a traffic signal there at the intersection. But as soon as those lights change, in some cases, people are running those red lights. And I'm hearing a lot of, and I'm concerned about the speed limit through there because I'm a safety guy. I've practically been run into at least 6 times in the last 2 years at that intersection. And, but anyway, what I'm trying to get at is, I like the speed limit coming from Southwest Boulevard down to Satinwood. It's downhill, 40-mile-an-hour speed limit. The problem is, it's in a curve when you come to that signal. And as far as I'm concerned, I think the city council should consider reducing that speed limit as you get closer to the intersection. I mean, if you're not gonna build a roundabout or anything, I think that needs to be slowed down just a little bit, because a roundabout would automatically slow down traffic in that intersection. You would still keep it moving, but it would be slower. So when you're coming down that hill, I think it would be appropriate to reduce it from 40 to 30 somewhere before you get to that intersection. There is room in there, I think, to slow people down, because I guarantee you, I can come down that hill and I can ride my brakes to keep 40 mile an hour or less, and people will be running on my tail end like I'm in a parking lot. And coming from the other direction, from west to east, when people come through that intersection, the traffic lane splits from 2 lanes to 3 lanes. You have a passing lane going up the hill towards Southwest Boulevard. People will turn that into a racetrack. I mean, I've been out in my backyard, and it just, once they get to that where lane splits, they pass and they go like crazy trying to go up that hill. And in my opinion, if we're not going to proceed with a roundabout, then I think the city needs to have more speed enforcement in that intersection area there. And I do recommend reducing the speed limit on either side of that intersection before you get to that intersection. That's my comments.
Thank you for sharing those comments for public record. Is there an opportunity there within that stretch to put some of our new indicator information speed signage to get the,
Yeah, I mean, if the council were to direct us to purchase more of those signs, then certainly they could be installed there.
I mean, just like we were using for temporary.
Yeah, we can move them around town. I mean, we would certainly do that. We, just on background, years ago, that speed limit was increased there to what it is today. And basically the police can sit there and write tickets all day long if they would still like to. But, and they do on occasion, I think, work the area. But, you know, speed limit signs, we all know, are not that effective, especially on the hill. I mean, I think that's what Councilman Spicer said earlier. You know, we've got so many hills, get these big hills, and it's just, you got to ride your brakes to stay at the 40. And that's what the sentiment was years ago. At least make it 40, so we're not just writing tickets all day long to people.
Yeah, you have the same thing on Southwest Boulevard from the intersection of the stadium down to Missouri Boulevard. Mm-hmm. That's a long, drawn out hill at 30 mile an hour. I guarantee you got to put it in second gear, or you got to ride your brakes all the way down the hill. I mean, so, I mean, to me, they're very similar streets, but yet they got 2 different speed limits. I mean,
look into that. All right, next item was Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
All right.
Thank you all.